It is another morning in Foxglade Penitentiary. Guards moved swiftly through the hallways. There was a different energy in the air today, one that didn't need to be spoken aloud. The guards kept their voices low and their steps brisk, exchanging uneasy glances as they moved through cell blocks. In one of the isolated, high-security cells, an inmate lay sprawled on the floor, his face pale and lifeless, his body broken in ways that were impossible to ignore. Blood splattered across the cold concrete walls and pooled around him, staining the stark gray floor in vivid crimson streaks. The sight of the inmate's twisted, mangled form was enough to make even the most hardened guards avert their eyes. The victim, later identified as Jared Bones Mulligan, was no ordinary prisoner. Known for his involvement in violent gang crimes and assaults, he was the kind of inmate who rarely backed down. But in death, he was reduced to nothing more than a chilling reminder that someone, somewhere, had taken it upon themselves to be both judge and executioner. Jared's death was the 13th in a string of brutal murders that had taken place within the walls of Foxglade in recent months, and with each passing death, the fear within the prison grew. The news of Jared's murder spread through the prison like wildfire, with rumors, theories, and whispered suspicions filling the cell blocks and corridors. In the mess hall, prisoners ate in silence, casting furtive glances at each other. Guards moved with caution, gripping their batons a little tighter and keeping an eye out for any signs of tension or conflict. It was as if a silent understanding had settled over everyone. Stay out of the way, and maybe you'll live to see another day. The guards who discovered Jared's body worked swiftly to clear the scene, documenting every detail. They exchanged uneasy glances, none of them willing to be the first to voice their growing concerns. For many of them, this was no longer about keeping order, it was about survival. Each murder in Foxglade had been brutal, calculated, and as far as they could tell, without a discernible pattern in victims, other than their history of violence. As they worked, Warden Isabella Faraday arrived on the scene, her expression unreadable as she observed the carnage. Faraday was a woman with years of experience under her belt, someone who had learned to keep her emotions in check in even the most disturbing situations. But this time, she allowed herself a moment of hesitation. She looked at the body, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the brutality of the scene. "We can't keep covering this up," one of the guards muttered, his voice low. Faraday's gaze snapped to him, her expression hardening. "We're not covering anything up, officer. We're handling this situation internally." The guard gave a short nod, but the unease in his eyes remained. He, like many others, was beginning to realize that whatever was happening inside Foxglade was far beyond their control. In the following hours, Warden Faraday reviewed the file she had compiled on the recent string of murders. Over the past 6 months, 12 inmates had been found dead in various wings of the prison, each one killed with a level of violence that indicated not only hatred but precision. Each time, the victim had been found alone, usually in a low-traffic area of the prison, with no witnesses and no clear signs of struggle. The victims had ranged from petty thieves to violent offenders, with no immediate connection between them. Yet, despite the apparent randomness, there was an undeniable pattern to the killings. Each murder had occurred when the security cameras had either been turned off for maintenance or had experienced unexplained glitches that left footage unavailable. It was as if the killer knew exactly when and where to strike, taking advantage of every blind spot and gap in the system. Faraday felt a chill settle over her as she reviewed the gruesome details. She knew Foxglade was no stranger to violence. After all, it housed some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. But this was something different, something darker. Someone, possibly even a staff member, was taking justice into their own hands, and the brutality of it was beyond anything she had ever encountered. In her gut, she knew the time had come to bring in outside help. There was no way they could contain this any longer. The murders had escalated to the point where internal control was no longer feasible. She picked up the phone, dialing a secure line. The decision to call in federal investigator Caelan Merrick had not been made lightly. Caelan had a reputation, a hard-edged investigator known for his no-nonsense approach and his rigid views on justice. He was respected in his field, but his disdain for criminals was well known. He saw the world in black and white, with little tolerance for gray areas or second chances. When the call came in, Caelan was in his office, sifting through files from a previous case. The details of Foxglade Penitentiary's recent problems were presented to him succinctly. A string of brutal murders, escalating violence, and a prison administration unable to control it. He listened quietly, asking only a few pointed questions before agreeing to take the case. By the time he arrived at Foxglade, word of his arrival had already spread among the prison staff. The guards watched him with a mix of curiosity and wariness as he made his way to Warden Faraday's office. He walked with a purposeful stride, his face set in a determined expression. It was clear from the moment he arrived that he was there to take control, to impose order on what he considered a chaotic and dangerous situation. Warden Faraday greeted Caelan in her office, her demeanor calm, but her eyes reflecting the tension that had settled over the entire penitentiary. "Investigator Merrick," she began, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." Caelan shook her hand firmly, his gaze unwavering. "Let's skip the formalities, Warden. I understand you have a problem on your hands. 13 bodies, all inmates, killed in what I understand to be gruesome ways." Faraday nodded, her expression somber. "That's correct. These killings go far beyond typical prison violence. Whoever's doing this has a pattern. They strike in areas with minimal visibility, always at times when the cameras are down." Caelan raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like someone with intimate knowledge of the prison's layout and routines. Have you considered that the killer might be one of your own?" Faraday's face tightened slightly, but she nodded. "We've considered that possibility, yes, but without concrete evidence, I can't go around accusing my staff. It's why we needed someone like you." Caelan leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You don't need to convince me, Warden. I'm here to find the truth, and I'm not leaving until I do. If there's a killer among your staff or your inmates, I'll find them." Faraday nodded, visibly relieved. "I'll give you full access to our records, and you'll have senior guard Torin Caro assisting you with anything you need." Escorted by Torin Caro, Caelan began his tour of Foxglade Penitentiary. Torin was a tall, imposing man with a stoic expression and a silent demeanor that suggested he wasn't one for small talk. He walked beside Caelan, pointing out various sections of the prison, including the high-security wing where Jared Mulligan had been found. "This is where most of the trouble happens," Torin said, his tone matter-of-fact. "These men aren't here because they shoplifted. They're dangerous, volatile, but even then, what's been happening lately? It's something else entirely." "Something else?" Caelan asked, casting a sidelong glance at him. Torin's jaw tightened. "These murders, they're too calculated. Whoever's doing this isn't just a violent offender, they're someone with control. They're someone who knows the routines, the shifts, the cameras. Whoever it is, they're playing a dangerous game, and they're good at it." Caelan's suspicion heightened. It wasn't just the inmates who were afraid. Torin, too, seemed unnerved by the killings. As they walked through the corridors, Caelan took in every detail, every glance from the guards, every whispered conversation between inmates. By the time Caelan returned to his temporary office, he had a sense of the gravity of the situation. Foxglade was a powder keg, a place where fear had permeated every corner. The inmates didn't just fear each other, they feared an unseen force, something or someone who could kill with impunity. And the guards, despite their hardened exteriors, were just as uneasy. He reviewed his notes, his mind racing through the possibilities. The brutality of the killings pointed to someone with deep-seated rage, someone who saw these inmates as more than just prisoners. They were targets. And while he didn't yet have a suspect, he knew one thing for certain. Whoever was responsible was far from finished. The morning after his arrival, Caelan stood in the cold, empty cell that had become the latest murder scene. The lingering odor of blood filled the air, and the walls bore evidence of a violent struggle. Caelan noted every detail: the placement of the body, the blood spatter on the walls, the lack of any significant personal items that might have indicated a motive. Jared Bones Mulligan had been a notorious figure among the inmates, but in death, he was little more than another victim in a string of gruesome murders that defied easy explanation. Caelan crouched to examine the bloodstains, his mind working through the facts he had collected. Each murder bore the same marks: broken bones, multiple lacerations, and a methodical, almost clinical approach. This was no spur-of-the-moment violence. Whoever was behind these killings had planned each one meticulously, ensuring there were no witnesses and minimal evidence left behind. The brutality spoke of anger, but the precision spoke of control. Whoever's doing this, Caelan muttered under his breath, knows exactly how to get in and out undetected. As he stood, a slight creak behind him made him turn. Senior guard Torin Caro had entered the cell, his face impassive as he watched Caelan's inspection. "Didn't expect a federal investigator to get his hands dirty," Torin commented. Crossing his arms, Caelan ignored the remark, standing up and facing him. "What can you tell me about Jared Mulligan? Any recent altercations? Enemies?" Torin shrugged. Bones had plenty of enemies. He ran a protection racket in here, made a few enemies among the other gangs, but nothing recent that would explain this, at least not from the inmates. Caelan narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, not from the inmates?" Torin hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Look, I know what it looks like. A string of murders, each one brutal. But these killings, they don't feel like inmate work. Not the kind of violence you'd expect in a place like this. It's controlled, calculated, like someone sending a message." Caelan's gaze sharpened. "And you think that someone might be a guard?" Torin's face remained neutral, but his silence spoke volumes. He glanced around as if making sure they were alone before responding. "I didn't say that. But I'll tell you this. Whoever's doing this isn't afraid to get close. They're moving around the prison like they own the place. That's all I'll say." Later that day, Caelan returned to his temporary office, a small, sparsely furnished room adjacent to the main security hub. He had requested access to files on the previous murders, and a stack of documents now sat on his desk, detailing each death in chronological order. As he pored over the case files, he began to notice a pattern. Each murder had taken place during shifts when certain guards were on duty, guards who had significant experience within the prison. He highlighted each name, scribbling notes in the margins. Most of the killings had happened in low surveillance areas, or in times when the cameras were reported as malfunctioning. Every time, the murder had occurred without a single witness, suggesting the killer not only knew the layout of the prison, but also how to navigate it with skill. In a few cases, he noticed that certain guards, particularly Torin Caro, were consistently nearby during the times the murders took place. Though this alone wasn't proof, it was enough to raise a red flag. A knock on his door interrupted his train of thought. Caelan looked up to see Nerys Whitaker, a young guard with a cautious but determined look in her eyes. She hesitated for a moment as if second-guessing her decision to approach him, then stepped into the room. "Investigator Merrick," she began, her voice low. "I thought you should know. There are rumors among the guards. Some of us think there's more going on here than just inmate violence." Caelan leaned forward, gesturing for her to continue. "Go on." Nerys glanced over her shoulder, checking the hallway before speaking again. "There are a few guards, senior ones, who seem different. I don't know how to explain it, but they're too comfortable with what's happening. They don't seem bothered by the murders, like it's business as usual." "Who specifically?" Caelan asked, his interest piqued. "Torin Caro, for one," she replied. "He's always been a hard case, but lately, it's like he's watching everyone. And then there's Galen Ashford. He's quiet, but he's always around when something goes down. I don't know if they're involved, but I can tell you they're not innocent bystanders." Caelan nodded, mentally adding Galen Ashford to his list of people to watch. "Thank you, Nerys. You've been helpful," she nodded, hesitating for a moment before leaving. Her words echoed in Caelan's mind. If guards like Caro and Ashford were more than just indifferent, if they were involved somehow, he'd have to tread carefully. Caelan decided to focus his efforts on the inmates next. Over the next several hours, he called in one prisoner after another, each one chosen based on their proximity to the recent murders and their knowledge of prison dynamics. He knew that these men would be reluctant to share information, especially if it implicated guards, but he hoped that fear of being the next victim might persuade them to speak. His first interviewee, Leander Blackwood, was a notorious figure within Foxglade, known for his short temper and a history of violent outbursts. Despite his reputation, Blackwood seemed unusually subdued as he took a seat across from Caelan, his eyes darting around the room. "Blackwood," Caelan began, flipping through his file, "I want to know what you've seen around here lately. You've been close to at least 2 of the victims." Blackwood's face paled slightly, but he forced a casual shrug. "I don't know nothing about that. People die in here all the time. It's prison." Caelan's gaze hardened. "Not like this. 13 murders, each one precise, each one with the same level of brutality. And you're going to tell me you haven't noticed anything?" Blackwood shifted in his seat, his discomfort apparent. "Look, I heard things, okay? People saying there's a cleaner. Someone who's taking out the trash, if you know what I mean. And I heard some guards talking about it, like it's just part of the system." "A cleaner?" Caelan repeated, intrigued. "And you think this cleaner might be one of the guards?" Blackwood shrugged again, but his fear was palpable. "I'm not saying anything more. You get on the wrong side of the guards in here, you might as well be dead." Caelan left the interview with Blackwood feeling uneasy. The rumors of a cleaner confirmed his suspicions that some of the guards might view the murders as a twisted form of prison justice. But without concrete proof, he was treading a thin line. Returning to his office, he found Torin Caro waiting for him, arms crossed and a stony expression on his face. Caro looked him up and down, his gaze cold. "You've been asking questions," Caro said flatly, "making some of us uncomfortable." "That's my job," Caelan replied evenly. "If some of your colleagues have a problem with it, maybe they have something to hide." Caro's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Caelan thought he saw a flicker of anger in the guard's eyes. "Careful, investigator. This isn't the outside world. In here, things operate differently. We keep order, and sometimes order requires a little force." Caelan raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "Force or murder?" Caro's face darkened. "I suggest you watch your tone, Merrick. You're an outsider. You might not understand what it takes to maintain control in a place like this." With that, Caro turned and walked away, leaving Caelan with a sense of foreboding. He realized that his presence wasn't just a disruption to the inmates, it was a threat to the fragile balance that the guards had created. And if he wasn't careful, he could be the next victim. As the day wore on, Caelan felt a mixture of frustration and determination settle over him. He had uncovered enough to know that something was very wrong within Foxglade's walls, but he was still missing the final piece, the proof that would connect the murders to the guards he suspected. He reviewed his notes late into the night, going over every name, every detail, every rumor. The picture was becoming clearer, but he still didn't have enough to confront anyone directly. All he could do was keep asking questions, keep pushing until someone slipped up. But as he looked at the faces of the victims on the files in front of him, he made a silent vow. No matter what it took, he would find the killer, and he would bring them to justice. The next day, Caelan began his day in the surveillance room, sifting through hours of footage from the weeks surrounding each murder. The security tapes provided a unique perspective of Foxglade's routine, with guards and inmates moving through their daily motions. However, Caelan quickly noticed something strange. The cameras experienced technical issues at suspiciously convenient times, often right before or after each murder. Caelan leaned over the monitors, meticulously documenting every detail. In multiple cases, the tapes went dark, precisely when guards shifted to certain areas where each murder had taken place. It was becoming clear that the killer was intentionally creating blind spots, using the prison's surveillance system to his advantage. His suspicions continued to center on senior guard Torin Caro, whose shifts seemed to overlap frequently with the times of the murders. But with no definitive proof, all Caelan could do was watch and wait, hoping to catch something that would finally connect the murders to the guards he suspected. As he left the surveillance room, Caelan spotted Nerys Whitaker, who had been working a morning shift nearby. She looked tense, glancing around before catching his eye. She hesitated, as though weighing the risk, then approached him quietly. "Investigator Merrick," she began, keeping her voice low. "I need to tell you something. I've been watching Caro. He's up to something. I know it, but I can't prove it." Caelan's gaze sharpened. "What have you seen?" Nerys glanced around, then spoke in a quick whisper. "He's been lurking." showing up on shifts he isn't assigned to, patrolling areas he doesn't usually cover. And each time something happens, I'm scared, honestly. But if I speak up without proof, I'll lose my job, or worse. Thank you, Neris, Caelan said, appreciating her courage. I'll make sure your information doesn't go to waste. He watched her walk away, his mind racing. Neris's observations only confirmed his suspicions. Caro's erratic behavior, his unassigned presence during the murders, it was all too coincidental. But he would need hard evidence before making his move. Caelan decided to test Caro's reactions and arranged to casually bump into him during one of his patrols. The senior guard was making his rounds near the high-security wing, where Jared Mulligan had been killed, when Caelan approached him with a casual greeting. "Busy day, Caro?" Caelan asked, keeping his tone neutral. Caro nodded, barely looking at him. "Same as always. Funny thing about these murders," Caelan continued. "They always seem to happen when certain guards are on duty. It's almost as if someone with insider knowledge is behind it." Caro's face remained impassive, but a flicker of something crossed his eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or irritation. "Is that right?" "Yes," Caelan replied, meeting his gaze. "And the more I look into it, the more it seems like these incidents aren't just accidents." Caro's jaw tightened. "Maybe you're looking too hard, Merrick. This is a prison. Bad things happen. And if you don't like the way we keep order around here, maybe you should step aside." Caelan raised an eyebrow. "I'm here to investigate, Caro, and if that means asking questions that make people uncomfortable, so be it." Caro's lips curled into a faint smirk, but he didn't reply. He simply walked away, leaving Caelan with the unsettling feeling that he was onto something, and that Caro knew it. After his conversation with Caro, Caelan decided to pay a visit to the cell blocks. Word of the murders had spread among the inmates, and the atmosphere in the prison was reaching a boiling point. In the past few weeks, the fear had turned to anger, and Caelan could see it in the prisoners' faces as they watched him pass. As he entered one of the blocks, a group of inmates gathered around him, their eyes wary but intense. One of them, a tall, heavily tattooed man named Cillian Ashford, stepped forward. His voice was low but carried an edge of defiance. "You're the one supposed to be solving these murders, right?" he demanded. Caelan nodded. "That's right, and I'll get to the bottom of it." Ashford scoffed, glancing at the other inmates around him. "You'd better hurry up then, 'cause if you don't, we'll handle it ourselves. We're done waiting for some suit to protect us." Caelan met his gaze, understanding the frustration. "I get it, but you know as well as I do that taking matters into your own hands won't solve anything. If you know something, anything that can help, you need to tell me." Ashford exchanged glances with the other inmates, then leaned in. "The guards, some of them, they don't care if we die. Hell, some of them seem to enjoy it. If you want answers, start with the people holding the keys." Caelan nodded, his suspicions deepening. "Noted. Stay alert, and stay out of trouble. I'll handle the rest." He left the cell block with a clearer picture of the mounting hostility within the prison. The inmates weren't just scared, they were on the brink of revolt. And if he didn't act fast, the entire prison could erupt into chaos. Determined to confront the issue head-on, Caelan went directly to Warden Faraday's office. The warden was at her desk, poring over reports, but looked up as he entered, her expression guarded. "Investigator Merrick," she greeted him, though her tone lacked warmth. "Warden Faraday," Caelan replied, his tone firm. "We need to talk about Senior Guard Caro. I've been watching him, and he's the common factor in all of these murders. His behavior, his shift patterns. It all points to him having knowledge of, if not direct involvement in, the murders." The warden frowned, her gaze hardening. "Those are serious allegations, investigator. And I'm prepared to back them up," Caelan said. "But I need your support. You know as well as I do that something's off with Caro. You've seen how he operates. He's taking advantage of the system, possibly even organizing these murders himself." Warden Faraday's jaw clenched. And for a moment, Caelan saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Caro's been with us a long time. He's harsh, but he keeps order." "At what cost?" Caelan demanded. "These aren't isolated incidents. They're targeted killings happening on his watch. The prisoners know it, the other guards know it, and now I know it. He's hiding something, and if you don't step in, he's going to keep killing." Faraday was silent for a moment, then finally spoke, her tone colder. "You're here as an investigator, Merrick, not to tell me how to run my prison. If you want to continue your investigation, that's your prerogative, but I won't authorize any actions against Caro without concrete proof." Caelan left her office feeling frustrated, but undeterred. He knew he was onto something. He could feel it, and even if the warden wouldn't support him, he would find a way to expose Caro's secrets. Caelan sat at his desk, reviewing every shift schedule and maintenance record he'd managed to obtain, searching for any clues that might give him more insight into Caro's movements. As he examined the logs, he began to notice an unusual pattern. Each time a murder had taken place, a maintenance check had been scheduled nearby. These checks, though routine on the surface, had all been handled by Caro or another guard in his close circle. Caelan leaned forward, noting the specific times of each maintenance check and how they aligned almost perfectly with the timing of the murders. The pattern was too precise to be a coincidence. It was becoming increasingly clear that Caro was using these maintenance checks to create alibis, placing himself close to the scene of each murder without drawing suspicion. With each connection he made, Caelan's conviction strengthened. Now, he needed just one more piece of evidence to link Caro directly to the killings. Later that day, Caelan decided to re-examine the scene of the most recent murder. As he entered the cell, he scanned the floor and walls for anything that might have been overlooked during the initial investigation. His eyes fell upon a small, inconspicuous object lodged between the metal bed frame and the wall, a broken badge clip. It looked like something that might have belonged to a staff member. Caelan carefully collected the clip, turning it over in his hand. There was no way to identify who it belonged to immediately, but it was a critical lead. He suspected it had broken off in the scuffle during the murder, an item that could easily be traced to a guard's uniform. Making a note to check with the security department on missing uniform pieces, he pocketed the clip and continued his search. Every instinct told him he was on the right track. Now it was a matter of connecting this piece with Caro. Feeling the weight of his findings, but knowing he needed more, Caelan returned to the cell blocks, this time calling in inmates who had been housed close to the murdered prisoners. His first interview was with Evander Tremaine, an inmate with a sharp mind and a reputation for being observant. "Tell me what you've seen around here," Caelan said as Evander took a seat across from him. "I'm not interested in your crimes. I'm interested in anything unusual you've noticed about the guards." Evander gave a slight smirk. "You really want to know? Try me." Evander leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "There's one guard. Caro, they call him. He's always on edge, always watching. I've seen him near the cells of the guys who ended up dead, but he's quick. Never stays long enough for anyone to get a good look." Caelan's pulse quickened. "Have you heard him say anything? Threats? Comments?" Evander shrugged. "Nothing that'd get him in trouble, but everyone knows he's different. Some of the guys say he's got a way of cleaning house around here. No one's willing to cross him." Caelan noted the word cleaning house, which he'd heard whispered before. The rumors about Caro being a cleaner within the prison were beginning to make sense. The term wasn't just a nickname. It was an acknowledgement of his role in eliminating inmates he saw as threats. Caelan's next interview was with Phineas Roderick, an inmate with ties to several murdered prisoners. Phineas was initially hesitant, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for hidden cameras. "They'll kill me if they know I talked," he whispered. "No one's going to hurt you," Caelan assured him. "Just tell me what you know." Phineas swallowed hard, looking at Caelan with a mixture of fear and defiance. "It's Caro, all right? Everyone knows he's behind it. He doesn't just keep order, he gets rid of anyone he thinks doesn't belong. But you didn't hear it from me." Caelan leaned in, his voice calm but firm. "If Caro is the one responsible, he won't get away with it. Not this time." Phineas nodded, but the look in his eyes suggested he wasn't fully convinced. Caelan left the room with more resolve than ever. He was close, he could feel it. As Caelan returned to his office, he was intercepted by a guard he hadn't met before. The guard, Owen Faraday, was younger and looked uneasy, as if he had something important to say. He cast a quick glance over his shoulder, then approached Caelan cautiously. "Investigator," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think you're getting close. Caro's been different lately, watching everyone. If you're not careful, he's going to come after you next." Caelan raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not surprised. "Does he know I'm onto him?" Owen hesitated, his gaze shifting nervously. "I don't know, but he doesn't like outsiders poking around. I'd watch your back if I were you." Caelan thanked him and watched him walk away, his mind racing. The warning was clear, and though he knew he was making progress, he realized he might be facing more than just one dangerous man. He was up against a system that had been hiding these murders for months, if not years. Caelan sat down with Nerys Whitaker, who had become one of his most valuable allies in the investigation. Her courage in stepping forward, despite the dangers, had given him insights he would never have gained alone. This time, however, she seemed even more nervous than usual. "Investigator Merrick," she began, glancing around the empty hallway to ensure they were alone. "I've been following up on your suspicions about Caro. I think he has others working with him." Caelan's eyes narrowed. "Others? You're certain?" She nodded, leaning in close. "I overheard him talking to Galen Ashford and Owen Faraday. They've been covering for him, creating distractions during his shifts, even logging false maintenance requests. He's using them to manipulate his movements through the prison." This was exactly what Caelan needed. He was close, but having the names of guards assisting Caro added depth to the web of collusion. Nerys's information reinforced that Caro's operation extended beyond just his own twisted sense of justice. He'd cultivated a network of support. Back in his office, Caelan spread out every piece of evidence he had gathered. Maintenance logs, witness statements, the broken badge clip, and now the names of other guards complicit in Caro's actions. With each document and detail, he pieced together a timeline that painted a damning picture of Caro's involvement. Using his access to personnel records, Caelan confirmed that the broken badge clip belonged to Caro, who had reported it missing weeks earlier. He documented this alongside the maintenance logs and his observations of Caro's unusual patrols. Every piece fell into place, giving him a strong case against Caro and his accomplices. But he knew it still wasn't enough. He needed one final, undeniable piece of evidence, something that would ensure Caro couldn't walk away. As Caelan's investigation drew closer to a conclusion, he noticed a shift in the demeanor of several guards. Those loyal to Caro became openly hostile, watching him with narrowed eyes and exchanging whispered conversations that ceased the moment he approached. Even Warden Faraday seemed more withdrawn, her demeanor colder than before. One afternoon, as Caelan made his rounds, Galen Ashford intercepted him in the hallway. Galen crossed his arms, blocking Caelan's path, his gaze hard and challenging. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Merrick?" Galen sneered. "Coming in here, disrupting our routines, putting good men like Caro under suspicion?" Caelan kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. "I'm here to uncover the truth. If Caro has nothing to hide, he has nothing to fear." Galen's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. "You don't know a damn thing about how this place runs. Men like Caro keep order. You take him down, and you'll see what real chaos looks like." Caelan didn't respond. He sidestepped Galen and continued down the hallway, feeling the weight of Galen's glare on his back. The threat was clear. Caelan was walking a thin line, and Caro's allies were prepared to protect him by any means necessary. The next morning, as Caelan prepared for another day of investigation, an urgent call came through his radio. Another inmate had been found dead in his cell, murdered in the same brutal manner as the previous victims. This latest death marked the 14th in the string of killings, each more horrifying than the last. Caelan rushed to the scene, his stomach churning with dread. The guards were already securing the area, their faces set in grim expressions as they tried to maintain control over the increasingly agitated inmates. The prison was on the verge of chaos, with inmates shouting and banging on their cell doors, demanding answers. As he surveyed the scene, Caelan felt a surge of anger. Caro's actions were growing bolder, more reckless. It was as if he wanted to provoke Caelan, daring him to act. Caelan knew he couldn't wait any longer. If he didn't bring Caro to justice soon, more lives would be lost. Determined to catch Caro in the act, Caelan enlisted Neris's help to monitor Caro's movements during his next shift. Together, they devised a plan to track him discreetly, hoping to gather one final piece of evidence that would solidify his guilt. They watched from a distance as Caro patrolled the cell blocks, his demeanor calm and controlled, his steps deliberate. He moved through the corridors with an air of authority, pausing occasionally to exchange words with other guards who seemed to defer to him. Caelan noted every interaction, every moment that suggested Caro was coordinating with his allies. At one point, Caelan observed Caro slipping into a restricted area marked for maintenance. This was the break he had been waiting for. Caelan followed him, moving silently down the hallway, staying just out of sight. As he peered around the corner, he saw Caro standing over a concealed compartment in the wall, retrieving a small metal object, a prison-issued shank, one of the few items that could inflict the kind of brutal injuries seen in the murders. Caelan felt a surge of triumph. This was the proof he needed. Caro had not only orchestrated the murders, but had also hidden the weapon in a place only he could access. With the final pieces of evidence in hand, Caelan knew it was time to confront Caro face to face. He found him in the main cell block during his shift, moving with his usual confident stride. Caelan approached, his gaze hard, and blocked Caro's path. "Caro, we need to talk," Caelan stated firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Caro raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at his lips. "I'm on duty, Merrick. Surely you can wait your turn." "Not this time," Caelan shot back. "I have evidence tying you directly to the murders. I know about the maintenance checks, the shifts you manipulated, and the hidden compartment with the weapon. It's over, Caro." Caro's expression didn't falter. Instead, he let out a low chuckle, his eyes glinting with something close to amusement. "Evidence? Huh? You think you've got it all figured out. But you don't know anything about what goes on here, Merrick. You're just another outsider thinking you can play hero." The smirk didn't leave his face, but Caelan noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the first sign that Caro knew he was cornered. Caro's mocking tone didn't shake Caelan. He continued, relentless. "I also know you've been tampering with the surveillance system. Every time there's a murder, the cameras conveniently malfunction or experience maintenance issues. And every time, you're conveniently close to the scene." Caro shrugged, maintaining his calm demeanor. "It's a prison, Merrick. Things break. You know how these places are, falling apart at the seams. But sure, go ahead and keep digging. Maybe you'll find something, if you're lucky." Caelan took a step closer, his voice low. "You've crossed the line, Caro. You think you can keep covering this up, but I have enough evidence now to implicate you, and the warden can't ignore it." Caro's eyes flickered, but his smirk stayed. "You don't get it, do you? Foxglade isn't just some government facility. It's a world of its own, with rules you wouldn't understand. I'm not just keeping order here. I'm cleaning out the trash. The kind of scum that doesn't deserve to breathe." After his confrontation with Caro, Caelan regrouped with Neris Whitaker, who had been keeping watch from a distance. She approached him, her expression filled with concern and a hint of fear. "What did he say?" she asked. Caelan shook his head. "He won't admit it outright, but he knows we're onto him. He's confident the system will protect him. But with your help, I can prove he's been tampering with the surveillance equipment." Neris nodded, determination hardening her features. "I'm in. We need to take him down, Merrick. He's been controlling everything for far too long." Together, they formulated a plan. Neris would help Caelan access the internal surveillance system, retrieving backup footage and log records that would show Caro's alterations and the timing of each murder. The stakes were high, but Caelan knew he could trust Neris. She was as committed to exposing Caro as he was. With the new evidence in hand, Caelan went to Warden Faraday once again, hoping she would finally act against Caro. He presented everything he had gathered, the surveillance logs, the evidence of tampering, and the witness statements from inmates. He expected resistance, but he wasn't prepared for the cold indifference in her gaze. "Investigator Merrick," she began, her voice as icy as ever. "While I appreciate your efforts, you're making very serious accusations against a respected member of my staff. Caro has been here for years, and I can't simply take your word without ironclad proof." Caelan's jaw clenched. "I've brought you everything you need. This isn't just word, it's concrete evidence. If you don't act, you're condoning murder. Faraday's expression remained neutral. Foxglade has its challenges, Merrick. We operate in a world you may not fully grasp. You might see murder, but in some cases, some would argue it's a form of justice. Justice? Caelan nearly shouted, incredulous. Allowing a guard to act as judge, jury, and executioner is anything but justice. You're protecting a murderer. Faraday's gaze hardened, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of guilt. But her tone remained resolute. You're here to investigate, not to dictate how I manage my staff. If you're so determined to pursue this, you'll need undeniable, irrefutable evidence. Caelan left her office, his anger simmering. He knew he was alone in this. Without the warden's support, he would have to find another way to bring Caro down. Determined not to back down, Caelan returned to his office and reviewed every detail he had, from the hidden compartment to the surveillance logs. He knew he couldn't wait for Warden Faraday's approval. If he didn't act soon, more inmates would die. He spent the next few hours coordinating with Nerys, creating a detailed timeline that linked each murder to Caro's shifts, the tampered surveillance, and the hidden weapon he'd seen Caro retrieve. They made a plan to catch Caro during his next shift, hoping to gather the final, undeniable proof of his actions. As night fell, Caelan steeled himself for what lay ahead. He was prepared to confront Caro alone if he had to risk everything to ensure that justice was served. This was no longer just an investigation, it was a fight to expose the truth in a place that had long buried it. The prison was eerily silent as Caelan Merrick prepared to put his plan into action. With Nerys Whitaker by his side, he arranged to monitor Caro's movements during his upcoming night shift. The plan was simple but risky. They would shadow Caro, hoping to catch him entering a restricted area or accessing the hidden compartment where he stored the murder weapon. Nerys, visibly tense but determined, glanced at Caelan as they positioned themselves in an unused observation room with a direct line of sight to the corridor Caro was assigned to patrol. "Are you sure this will work?" she whispered, glancing nervously down the dark hallway. Caelan nodded, his gaze fixed. "It has to. We've lined up every piece of evidence. Now we just need to see him in the act. If we catch him accessing the compartment, there'll be no denying it." They waited in silence, each passing second intensifying the tension. The weight of their plan pressed heavily on them both. Failure was not an option. As they waited, a guard rushed into the observation room, out of breath and looking pale. "Merrick," he gasped. "Another inmate, he's dead. Just found him in his cell." Caelan's heart sank. The death brought the total to 15, each murder growing more brutal. The prisoners were in a state of near revolt, the fear among them transforming into fury. Caelan knew this latest murder was likely Caro's attempt to assert control one last time before his inevitable fall. "Nerys," Caelan said, his tone steely, "we're running out of time. Let's stick to the plan. Caro will likely come to clean up his tracks. He's more reckless now." Nerys nodded, her face set in determination. The latest murder was a sobering reminder of the urgency of their mission. They couldn't let Caro walk free another day. As part of their preparation, Caelan had enlisted the help of certain inmates who had witnessed Caro's suspicious movements around the time of previous murders. One of these inmates, Alaric Langston, had approached Caelan earlier with more details, visibly shaken. "He's not just a guard, you know," Alaric whispered, his voice barely audible. He's some kind of monster. We've all seen him near the cells, coming in and out without anyone stopping him. It's like he owns the place." Caelan listened carefully, cataloging every detail. Alaric's testimony, combined with the other inmates who had come forward, painted a damning picture of Caro's unchecked reign over the prison. But Caelan knew he needed more than just statements. He needed concrete evidence that no one, not even Warden Faraday, could dismiss. Finally, their moment came. Caelan and Nerys watched as Caro entered the hallway, his movements deliberate. Caelan's pulse quickened. Caro was heading toward the storage area, where the hidden compartment was located. They crept down the hallway, staying within the shadows, careful to keep their distance. Caro paused, glancing around before reaching into the wall behind a loose panel and pulling out the metal shank Caelan had previously seen. His movements were quick and precise, betraying a practiced ease. This wasn't the action of a man hiding out of fear. It was someone who believed he was untouchable. Caelan quietly signaled to Nerys, who was recording Caro's actions with a handheld camera they'd smuggled into the prison. The footage would be the final, indisputable piece of evidence linking Caro directly to the murders. As they finished recording, Nerys accidentally knocked a broom handle against the wall, creating a faint echo down the corridor. Caro's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the hallway. Caelan held his breath, pressing himself against the wall, feeling the tension in his chest tighten. If Caro discovered them now, the entire operation would be jeopardized. For a moment, Caro lingered, his gaze lingering on the shadows at the end of the corridor. He seemed to consider approaching, but ultimately shrugged it off, pocketing the shank and heading back down the hall. Caelan exhaled slowly, relieved but more determined than ever. With Caro gone, they quickly gathered their equipment and returned to their observation post, eager to review the footage. The recording captured everything: the compartment, the weapon, Caro's actions, and it would be more than enough to bring Caro's reign to an end. With the footage secured, Caelan knew the time had come to act. He wasted no time, arranging for an immediate meeting with Warden Faraday. He walked into her office, holding the damning evidence, his expression resolute. "Warden Faraday," he began, setting the video recording on her desk. "I have everything we need." This footage shows Caro retrieving the murder weapon from a hidden compartment. It places him directly at the scenes, carrying out these brutal killings. Faraday's face went pale as she reviewed the footage, her fingers shaking slightly. She could no longer deny the truth staring back at her. For the first time, Caelan saw a crack in her icy facade. "God help us," she muttered, finally understanding the full extent of Caro's actions. "This ends now, Warden," Caelan said firmly. "We can't allow him to walk free, not after everything he's done." Faraday gave a short nod, her reluctance giving way to resignation. "I'll authorize his arrest. But be careful, investigator. Caro won't go down without a fight." Caelan contacted his federal superiors, informing them of the situation and requesting immediate backup. A team was dispatched to Foxglade within the hour, equipped to handle the high-stakes arrest in a hostile environment. The agents, well aware of the danger involved, took their positions discreetly around the penitentiary, prepared to move in when Caelan gave the signal. As the federal agents took their positions, Caelan and Nerys gathered in a secure office, reviewing their plan one final time. They would confront Caro directly in the guardroom where he typically gathered with his closest allies. Their objective was to isolate him, preventing any attempt by his accomplices to intervene. Nerys looked at Caelan, her face a mix of determination and fear. "This is it. After all these months, we're finally bringing him down." Caelan gave her a reassuring nod. "We've got this, Nerys. He won't be able to escape justice this time." Before confronting Caro, Caelan reached out to a few of the inmates who had previously spoken to him, asking them to provide formal testimony regarding Caro's actions. While many were reluctant, fearing retribution, the presence of federal agents reassured them. Several inmates came forward, offering first-hand accounts of Caro's suspicious behavior and the fear he instilled among the prisoners. These testimonies added another layer of support to Caelan's case, reinforcing the image of Caro as a predatory figure who had exploited his position to commit horrific acts. With the inmates' statements, Caelan now had a solid case that would make it impossible for Caro to escape the consequences of his crimes. Before initiating the arrest, Caelan had a final conversation with Warden Faraday. Despite her previous reluctance, she now seemed fully committed to supporting the arrest, her expression grave. "I can't believe it came to this," she admitted, a hint of remorse in her voice. "I failed to see the monster he'd become. I thought he was keeping order." Caelan met her gaze, his tone firm but understanding. "It's a hard thing to see, Warden, especially when someone like Caro hides behind the system. But now we have a chance to correct it. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again." Faraday nodded, visibly moved. "You have my word, investigator. I'll cooperate fully with the federal team. Caro's reign ends today." With the plan set, Caelan led the team to the guardroom, where Caro was reviewing paperwork with a few of his loyal associates. The moment he noticed Caelan and the federal agents, his face twisted into a sneer, his usual smugness hardening into defiance. "What's this, Merrick?" Caro demanded, standing up. "Think you can scare me with a few suits?" Caelan stepped forward, holding up the arrest warrant. "Torrin Caro, you're under arrest for multiple counts of murder, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. We have enough evidence to bury you." Caro's expression shifted to one of fury, his hands clenching into fists. "You don't understand anything about what I've done for this prison, Merrick. I've kept order here. I've done what none of you had the guts to do." "No," Caelan replied coldly, his voice steely. "You abused your power to murder inmates under the guise of justice. That ends now." As the agents moved forward, Caro tried to resist, lunging at Caelan. A scuffle broke out, but the federal team quickly subdued him, restraining him as he shouted threats and insults, his defiance giving way to desperation. His loyal associates, witnessing his fall, backed away, unwilling to face the same consequences. With Caro in cuffs, Caelan felt a wave of relief. The long nightmare of Foxglade Penitentiary was over, and justice at last had been served. The federal agents conducted a full sweep of the prison, bringing in several of Caro's loyal associates for questioning. Guards like Galen Ashford and Owen Faraday, who had assisted Caro by covering up his actions or looking the other way, were promptly taken into custody. Each guard faced charges ranging from obstruction of justice to complicity in murder. As the news of the arrest spread, the prison staff reeled from the revelations. Many guards who hadn't been involved found themselves questioning their roles in the system, grappling with the reality that their colleagues had been capable of such calculated brutality. Caelan watched from a distance as each arrest was made, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The network of corruption Caro had fostered was finally unraveling, and the prison, for the first time in years, seemed poised for real change. With Caro gone and his allies in custody, Caelan knew he had one more duty to fulfill before leaving Foxglade. He arranged to meet with a small group of inmates, including those who had risked their safety to testify against Caro. As he entered the room, the prisoners looked at him with a mixture of respect and relief. For the first time, they saw someone who had fought for their survival rather than treating them as expendable. Caelan looked at each of them, acknowledging their courage. "I know this hasn't been easy," Caelan began, his voice steady. "Your testimonies helped make this possible. Caro and those who protected him will face justice because you spoke out. You've given this prison a chance to change." One of the inmates, Alaric Langston, nodded, his eyes betraying a mixture of gratitude and lingering wariness. "We never thought anyone would listen to us. It's been a long time since anyone cared about what happens in here." Caelan gave him a small nod. "It's not just about the system, it's about people. Everyone deserves a chance, even here. This shouldn't have happened, and it won't happen again." The inmates exchanged glances, and Caelan could see that, while they still had their doubts, a spark of hope had been ignited. For the first time, they saw the potential for a life in Foxglade without the constant fear of targeted violence. In the days following Caro's arrest, Foxglade underwent a massive internal investigation. Federal agents, alongside state officials, reviewed every protocol, every security measure, and every aspect of the prison's administration. Warden Faraday, though not charged with a crime, faced an official inquiry regarding her oversight of Caro and her initial reluctance to act on Caelan's suspicions. Under the scrutiny of the investigation, Faraday began implementing changes that would make Foxglade a safer place. Surveillance systems were updated, blind spots were reduced, and procedures for reporting guard misconduct were overhauled. The prison's management adopted a zero-tolerance policy toward any abuse of power, hoping to rebuild trust with both the staff and the inmate population. Though these reforms couldn't undo the harm Caro had caused, they represented a first step toward genuine accountability. Caelan could see that, while the path was long, Foxglade might finally evolve into a place that valued justice over unchecked control. As the investigation concluded and the final pieces of evidence were submitted, Caelan found himself alone in his temporary office, reflecting on the case that had defined his time at Foxglade. He looked down at his files, each one bearing the name of a murdered inmate, and felt the weight of each life lost. He had entered Foxglade with a black and white view of the prison system. convinced that criminals were the sole danger. But now, after months of uncovering the truth, he realized how deeply corruption could embed itself even in places meant to uphold justice. It was a hard truth to face, but one that strengthened his resolve. He had learned to see the humanity in people he once disregarded as lost causes, to understand that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about fairness, about ensuring that no one, not even those behind bars, was treated as expendable. He stood, packing up his files, knowing that this experience had changed him profoundly. Justice was more complex, more fragile than he had ever imagined, and it was something he now understood he had to approach with both strength and empathy. The next morning, Caelan walked through the gates of Foxglade Penitentiary, his case officially closed. Nurse Whitaker was waiting outside, offering him a final nod of respect. She had been instrumental in bringing down Caro, and he knew he wouldn't have succeeded without her courage. "Thank you, Nurse," he said, offering her a hand, "for everything. You made a real difference." She shook his hand, her gaze steady. "I just wanted to do the right thing, investigator. It's not every day someone like you comes through here and actually listens." Caelan gave her a small, appreciative smile. "Keep fighting for the right thing. You've already shown you have what it takes." With that, he stepped away, the gates of Foxglade closing behind him as he walked toward his car. He glanced back one last time, taking in the imposing walls, the high fences, and the watchtowers that had housed so many secrets. But now, those secrets had been laid bare, and the place seemed just a bit less foreboding. He climbed into his car and drove away, his mind turning to his next assignment, already feeling the drive to uncover the truth wherever it might lead. He was no longer just a federal investigator, he was a seeker of justice, wherever it might be threatened. The story of Foxglade Penitentiary's exposed corruption and the brutal murders committed by senior guard Torrin Caro hit the media with full force. News outlets across the country reported the story, focusing on the disturbing details of Caro's abuses, the inmates he had killed, and the cover-ups by his accomplices within the prison's administration. Public outrage followed, with calls for a complete overhaul of prison oversight policies and an investigation into similar institutions across the country. Foxglade Penitentiary became a symbol of systemic corruption, sparking conversations about accountability and justice within the criminal justice system. Caelan watched the coverage quietly, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. While he was glad the truth had finally come to light, he couldn't help but mourn the lives lost under Caro's twisted reign. The attention brought closure, but it also served as a reminder of how much had been lost. One morning, Caelan went through his case files one last time, reflecting on each step of the investigation. He read the names of the inmates who had been murdered, each name carrying the weight of a life unjustly taken. His thoughts drifted to the inmates who had trusted him enough to come forward, the courage they had shown, and the price some had paid for speaking out. The memories of his time at Foxglade lingered with him, reminding him of the dangers of unchecked power. He closed each file with a sense of finality, filing away the evidence that had once been his lifeline through the twisted maze of the investigation. He knew he would carry the memory of this case with him for years to come, shaping his approach to justice in every case that followed. Caelan left his office for a brief walk outside, reflecting on how his experience at Foxglade had changed him. His once rigid views on justice and punishment had evolved. He'd entered the penitentiary with a deep-seated disdain for criminals, seeing them only as products of their choices. But now he understood that justice required compassion and a willingness to see people for who they truly were. Flawed, yes, but still human. He vowed to carry this newfound empathy with him, using it as a guide in his future cases. From now on, he would approach each investigation with an open mind, determined to find the truth without judgment. He realized that justice wasn't simply about retribution, it was about understanding the full story and ensuring fairness for everyone, no matter their past. As Caelan finished his walk, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a call from his supervisor, informing him of a new assignment, a case involving a missing person under suspicious circumstances. Though he hadn't expected a new case so soon, he felt ready. Foxglade had tested him in ways he'd never anticipated, but it had also given him the clarity he needed to move forward with purpose. He accepted the case, noting the details with the same meticulous care he'd always shown. This time, however, he knew his approach would be different. He was no longer just an investigator. He was a protector of the truth, ready to expose injustice wherever it hid.